Here's this week's Steam Code Raffle winner. I give a Steam code for a free game away with every video I do, and all you have to do to enter is leave a comment that wouldn't violate Twitter's terms of service. Make sure you have contact info in your YouTube profile so I can reach out to you. A complete list of games to choose from is in the description below. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a chance to win. Now on with the show. I'm playing something almost every week, and sometimes I want to talk about it and give you a vertical slice. So stick with me for some lightning reviews. This week on the chopping block. This week I've been playing Temtem. Actually, saying I spent a week is far too charitable. I initially spent an afternoon trying out Temtem, and just in that short amount of time I was inclined to believe that it was something that I did not want to touch with a 10-foot pole. Well, that might be a bit harsh, so let's backtrack a little. In concept, it seemed rather promising, but any idea is promising until it's actually executed. That idea being Pokemon, but an MMO. Like I said, in concept, not a terrible idea, until we realized that Pokemon Sword and Shield already dabbled with minor MMO elements, as in portions of an open world being communal and being able to run into other players, along with the ability to interact, battle, and trade with almost anyone. Temtem extends that into the entirety of the map, and as far as I'm concerned, it is absolutely devastating to the notion of immersion from a narrative standpoint. For me, nothing kills the sensation of you wandering as a lone traveler going into a broad world like exiting your starting house and seeing 20 random jack-offs exiting the exact same point. That point theoretically being your childhood home. This is why I also have difficulty getting into MMOs in general. It is incredibly difficult to make a world that will meaningfully react or adjust to the player when it has to accommodate hundreds, if not thousands of other simultaneous players. It's one of several reasons that I personally don't take to MMOs, not that I am lacking in any effort of attempts. World of Warcraft, Star Wars The Old Republic, The Elder Scrolls Online, and Fallout 76, well after it was patched to acceptability by the way, have all been dalliances that I dove into at one point or another, and I eventually got bored every time due to a lack of immersion or willingness to indulge in the story, which attempted to inflate my importance when I could simply look around and see at least 5 other individuals in my exact same state of story progression. Granted, sticking to the Pokemon formula doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the most earth-shattering of stories, but it can at least facilitate base-level immersion. Of course, even in the brief window of my playtime, I was already piling up nitpicks like a chimpanzee with cleaner condition OCD. For one, some, but not all of the NPCs initiate their dialogue boxes with Banjo-Kazooie-esque singular-syllable grunts, and the noise made by your matron character was already grating after interacting with her for barely 2 minutes. Additionally, once I did exit my starting house, I couldn't help but feel cluttered, if not slightly claustrophobic, due to either the environmental design or the fact that I was sharing the same space with at least 50 other players. That crowding also eliminates a sense of wonder or exploration, and more gives the impression that navigating your way through the world is more akin to making your way through a queue to an amusement park ride, except in this metaphor, the entire attraction is the queue itself. This leads me to believe that, at least from my own viewpoint, a full-blown MMO integrating the Pokemon formula is at the very least an uphill battle, if not entirely incompatible. Speaking of the Pokemon formula, this game, even in my brief window, is blatantly attempting to be a Pepsi to Pokemon's Coke. However, they seemingly go out of their way to try and differentiate by using alternate terminology or item names in order to not fall afoul of misrepresenting the more popular and mainstream title it's trying to emulate. Unfortunately, this also leads to several problems, some of which are extremely hindering for someone who is thoroughly immersed in the Pokemon franchise. Having to change terminology and other aspects in order to separate leads to an overwhelming sense of the uncanny. What I mean is, it's close enough to the material that it's trying to reproduce that you could recognize it as such, but the change in terminologies just leaves you feeling uncomfortable or in the very least confused and not wanting to continue. However, I anticipated that this was going to be an issue going into it, and I wanted to give Temtem a genuine shot to try and overcome those issues of perception, or even actively combat them. I wanted to, but then I started exploring some of the menus. I was looking for a save function, not knowing at the time that the game autosaves to the server every chance it gets. But in the process, I discovered the monetization tab and immediately thought I was done. I get that going for the live service format stipulates a certain degree of extra monetization, especially for MMOs, but once more, let's refer back to Pokemon Sword and Shield and acknowledge that the only monetization was the initial purchase price and the cost of DLC expansions if you decided to go for them. But Temtem has skins, mounts, emotes, and all sorts of other things that I could not give half of a sugar-frosted about. And really, you're charging us for mounts of creatures that you could catch in the game when otherwise it could just be a menu option, you stingy They do not equal a selling point to me and only trigger my cynicism synapses that the game is going to try and bilk me out of as much cash as it can, and given that I was already thoroughly soured on the concept of most MMOs given my previous experiences, I decided right then and there that I had established to my satisfaction that I was not going to enjoy this title. Or so I thought. After I put down the controller, I was initially looking for something else to make a double bill for, but then I allowed myself to cool down. Most of my significant gripes have been this game's MMO aspects, and while I've listed some Pokemon elemental complaints, it's mostly been tied to wording instead of mechanics. So I decided to make another round of it and try to ignore as much of the MMO stuff as possible, even though one could argue that being incredibly difficult in and of itself, considering that during the same pause, I also saw an article stating that Temtem had shot up to about 1 million players. I would have tried playing an offline option, but alas, no such option exists. So I booted up for another round to research the Pokemon side of this coin. The first thing isn't a complaint, but more a matter of preference. I can't say I really care for the creature design or really the game's art style in general. And going back to some minor complaints I had about the Pokemon side, while I spent a few segments complaining about what specific things are called, certain other aspects provided an interesting twist to the usual capture, collect, catalog combat formula that Pokemon has been perfecting for over 25 years. Firstly, every battle, provided you've got enough Temtem in your party, is a double battle, adding an interesting level of depth as a default. Additionally, your moves aren't dictated by your Pokemon being locked onto a specific number that they can have between needing to heal, but instead a stamina bar that gets depleted depending on the strength of the move you use in the midst of battle. You can technically overexert yourself by using more stamina than you have, or you can take a turn to rest and recover, and that's a compelling mechanic. Secondly, I greatly appreciate one of the story items that allows you to heal your entire team out in the field. Unfortunately, it's locked to a single use between healings at Temporiums, the new proper noun to replace Pokemon Centers. They were so close to making it so that you didn't have to worry about your team getting low and then grinding all the way back to a healing center, then going back along the route to try and get to where you had previously progressed. Another issue is a subtle pacing problem that comes from making every battle doubles. It's entirely possible for your team of creatures to wear out twice as fast, further exacerbating the issue I mentioned of having to stop what you're doing and run back to the nearest healing center. It got to a point where I was dreading any official battle on my route to the next story trigger. It was at this moment that I realized I was basically forcing myself to play, and by that point I think the opinion has pretty much solidified. I don't know if Temtem is a bad game or not, but I can certainly say that it's not my thing. Being in my 30s, I think I'm a little bit past the target demographic that the Chinese bootleg plush market is trying to absorb. For someone who's never experienced a Pokemon game, but loves MMOs and hasn't been turned off by anything I've said prior, have at it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a shiny Eternatus code that I need to redeem. Hey, look at that, it's the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember that commenting can actually win you a free prize. So until next time, this is Gheeotine saying thanks for watching and keep your head on your shoulders.